Track 21. Section 2. You will hear a talk about a company by a chief executive. First, you will have 20 seconds to look at questions 1 to 6. Now listen carefully and answer questions 1 to 6.
I'd like to start by welcoming everyone to our annual meeting and thanking you all for your hard work. It's been a great year for us in terms of expansion and optimizing business opportunities, and I'm pleased to say that Benchmark Consulting is a thriving, successful company. I'd like to take this opportunity to give you an overview of where the company began and where we'll be going in the next 10 years. For those of you who've been with the company since the start, sorry if you already know all this, but we have so many new staff members that I thought it would be worth filling in some background information. Benchmark Consulting was set up in 2000 by James Cox, a local entrepreneur who opened the first office in Melbourne. His real achievement was to create a new consultancy system which enabled clients to see which of the key areas of their business needed strengthening. James was incredibly successful with his system and started the company off on a journey of expansion. He retired in 2006 and was succeeded by Fred Montgomery. Fred shared James's views on consulting and continued the expansion. He increased revenue to $5 million and opened a new office in Perth. Soon the Benchmark Consulting system had become just that, the benchmark for many other consulting firms, and Fred took the opportunity to sell Benchmark for $10 million in 2008. Our new owners are, as you know, TFB Group Limited, and their investment has allowed us to build our brand new headquarters here in Sydney. TFB Group have brought us more exposure at a national level, and our most recent success has been winning a contract with the Government of Australia, advising on management restructuring. Now, we ourselves have done a little reorganisation over the last year to maximise our productivity. We've thought long and hard about the best location for the marketing department, as this is the key to facilitating our future business. Although Perth has a large number of marketing companies, which enables us to learn from our competitors, it's Melbourne that's the gateway to international connections, and therefore we've decided to move all marketing operations there. In terms of professional development, we wanted to optimise the training programs available to our staff because training is vital if we want to remain competitive. As a result, staff training will no longer be here in Sydney, but instead will take place in the Perth office, where new facilities have been installed. Finally, we've looked at how to optimise our back-office administrative functions. Currently, each office has its own admin department. However, this is proving to be less efficient than we would like. In order to resolve this situation, all these functions will now be centralised here in Sydney.
Before you hear the rest of the talk, you will have 20 seconds to look at questions 7 to 10. Track 22. Now listen and answer questions 7 to 10.
So, what does all this mean for the future? Well, after 10 years, I've decided that Benchmark needs a new vision for the future. I think it's time for us to divide up parts of the business into smaller units. Therefore, over the next 5 years, I aim to set up 2 small subsidiary companies in order to focus on international expansion in Europe and Asia. There are many organisations in emerging markets which could benefit from our experience and skills. Which leads me to the next point for future development, that of increasing our workforce. It's become clear that all our departments are understaffed, so we'll be taking on more employees over the next year. And the really good news is that to make us a desirable employer, all positions, current and future, will receive a salary increase of 10%. Lastly, I know that some people are worried about the financial aspects of having to move to another city as part of the restructure, so Benchmark will be providing a relocation package to all employees thus affected. This is because we would like you all to remain with the company for the foreseeable future.
That is the end of section 2. In the exam, you will have half a minute to check your answers. Track 23. 1. When I was living in Ireland, it was quite difficult to understand the local accent. 2.
Do you think it's important to sound like a native speaker?
3. I would have learnt Latin, but it wasn't an option when I was at school. Track 24. 1.
Many of the dialects in the world are gradually dying out.
2. Can you recommend ways in which I can improve my listening skills? 3.
I'm researching minority languages for my essay, so I went to the British Library to find out more information.
Track 25. Learning a language isn't easy. Learning a language isn't easy. Track 26. 1. There are many South American Indian languages, none of which are related to Spanish. 2.
Studying accents is a good way to understand if a language is changing or not.
Track 27. 1.
I stopped taking Greek lessons soon after I left school.
2.
How will local languages stay in use if fewer people learn them?
Track 28.
Morning, everyone. How are you?
Fine, thanks, Joe.
Yeah, fine, Joe. Have you managed to do much research on our minority languages project?
Well, Julia, I've been having some trouble finding information about the number of Cornish speakers in the UK. The records at the Office of National Statistics and the Cornish Language Council say different things, so I'm not sure who to believe.
Susan, have you got any information about this?
I was looking on the government's minority languages website, and it says that nearly half the minority language speakers in the UK are speakers of Welsh.
Are you sure it's nearly half? I thought the number of Gaelic and Welsh speakers was more or less the same.
It used to be when Gaelic was a compulsory subject in schools, but nowadays there are fewer speakers of Gaelic compared to Welsh. And apparently, with Cornish, it's difficult to know the exact percentage of the population who speak it, because most people only speak it to intermediate level. Very few people are fluent speakers.
I suppose that's why the statistics are different. Well, I think we should go with the more conservative estimate based on the number of fluent speakers.
I think you're right, which means that Cornish isn't spoken by nearly as many people as the other languages.
Yes, I think that's right too. Based on fluent speakers, that means that Welsh is the most widely spoken, and the numbers of Irish and Gaelic speakers are more or less the same.
Track 29.
Right, Harry, Rob, shall we get started on this presentation for European studies?
Well, how about if I start by talking about the central regions of Spain where most people speak Spanish?
Good idea. It's important we make it clear that the majority of the population use Spanish as their main language. Then I can introduce the Galician accent of the northwest.
But isn't Galician more of a dialect?
Oh, yes, you're right.
We've got to get our terminology correct, because Spain is complicated in terms of languages and dialects and accents. How about we then move across to the northeast, and I give details on the Basque language and how it's different from Spanish?
That seems logical, Stephanie. Do you also want to mention the other language in the northeast? It's Catalan, isn't it?
Yes. In fact, we should say it's the official language of the region to show how important it is.
So, what am I going to present?
We need to include something about accents and speaking styles, don't we?
Of course. I could explain the difficulties of understanding the accent in the south due to the fact that the locals speak quickly.
Excellent. Well, I think that covers everything. Shall we meet tomorrow to practice our presentation?
Track 30. So, Natalie, Louise, how are you doing with your report on encouraging people to speak local languages?
Fine, thanks, Dr. Phillips. It's been really interesting.
We've found lots of information which we've collated for our report.
Good. What are you going to focus on?
Well, many schools and colleges are doing good work promoting local languages, both as qualifications and in terms of after-school clubs.
And then there's the rise in popularity of minority language music, which seems to be driven by tourism. Tourists who are exposed to songs in indigenous languages become interested in learning those languages.
OK, now you need to be careful with these topics. They are fascinating, but you need to look at the influences which drive language learning. Education doesn't leave people much choice, and music isn't a strong enough factor.
Do you have any suggestions for us?
Well, what did we talk about in last week's seminar? Can you remember any of the real push factors?
Do you mean things like communication and relationships between companies and their workers?
It's much more powerful than music, don't you think?
Yes, I see what you mean. So I suppose our other idea isn't very strong either. We also thought about hobby groups, but I'm beginning to think they're less significant.
Yes, there aren't sufficient hobbyist groups to make a real difference to local language learning. But think about something else which is similar but reaches a much larger proportion of the population of a country or community.
Ah, like online discussion groups. I remember in the lecture you talked about how the internet is fueling the increase in local languages through the World Languages Project.
This is more appropriate for your report because we can actually measure the amount of correspondence in each language and chart increases and decreases over time, which makes it a more rigorous form of analysis.
Of course. So we should definitely include that in our report.
It's becoming clearer now. We need to write about the larger factors involving commerce and online communication where we can record language usage.
I think it's better than looking at anecdotal information.
Thanks, Dr. Phillips.